Well, I've said it often enough, whenever you go out into your garden, have a pair of snips or pruners with you, because you never know when you're gonna have to deadhead something. And right now, these baskets look absolutely glorious. I planted them last fall, but look at them now. They're just really beautiful combination. Stuart is not nodding his head. A beautiful combination of edibles, white pansies, some kale that's about to flower. I think they really look spectacular. The hyacinths that I planted last fall, though, are about past their prime, so I'm snipping away some of those blooms. So let's do a walkabout on a Saturday so that you can kind of see what's going on in my garden. If you've got things that are coming up in your garden that are looking beautiful right now or about to pop, please comment below, let us know where you are from, because it's so fun to contrast where my garden is in comparison to yours, depending on our respective gardening zones. So I've got my snips in hand, and I've done a lot of cleanup this morning, you guys. I still need to do a lot more seed planting and work in the potager, pruning, but what I concentrated on today was taking out a bunch of dead plants. Now here's my philosophy on that. I talked before about the difficulty sometimes in knowing whether something is pretending dead, or you're not sure it's dead, or it's really dead, and do you have the patience to wait or not? Well, right now, when stuff is starting to look really pretty, I don't want to wait for that brown dead stuff to tell me whether it's alive or not. The other reason and so that makes me think I'm just gonna go ahead and pull some of those out and put something else new in, or this year I may not replace it with anything, simply because I want to reduce maybe some of the container plantings I have. Now, I heard you just gasp. Last year, I had so many, but last year during the pandemic, it was more of a hobby garden. I don't have a greenhouse, so I was experimenting with a lot of different things, a lot of different plantings. But this year, I am gonna have people back in my garden, and so I want it to look more beautifully staged, and I don't want things to look too busy and too distracting. So you'll see some empty pots here, and it was no small amount of work to just pull out the dead stuff. So I will touch base with you guys again to let you know what I have decided to put in these empty pots, urns, hanging baskets and things. But for right now, they're just empty, and that makes me feel a little bit more under control, like I've at least got a game plan, because there's still a lot of other brown stuff. Now, Stuart, if you can point up, you can see that the redbud trees, these are eastern redbud trees. They're native to Oklahoma. And I planted all of these as babies, some of them maybe about 15 years ago. And they really took a hit in the ice storm, but they were still beautiful enough to create that ceiling effect that I wanted. And pretty soon, this is going to be just completely covered in those gorgeous pink blooms. Now, if you guys have watched me for any length of time, you know I'm always complaining about the power lines. And a lot of you have commented, well, why don't you just bury the power lines? Well, that's really not an option. This is a 1930s neighborhood. In newer neighborhoods, the power lines are buried, but it would be horrifically expensive, if not impossible, to bury the power lines. Stuart, if you could turn around, I'm going to show you all my uglies. Now, pretty soon that large power pole will be covered in green and you really won't see it. But you can imagine the difficulty there would be in trying to bury all of those power lines. So right now that's not a possibility, and I just have to do what I can in a safe way and in a responsible way to obscure the power lines. So there's the answer kind of to that question. Now, I've started pruning some of these boxwood balls that have brown on them. I've pruned them once, and then obviously I'll prune them again to reduce the amount of brown, the brown tips. It's interesting to me the different microclimates that are just in my small garden, and which things got really zapped and which ones did not. But I'll keep doing that over the season, and by the end of the season, most of these will be just fine. Now let's talk a little bit about one of my favorite spring bulbs, Luca Gem. Look at these sweet little snowflake flowers. Are those not the dearest things? They kind of hang down in a bell-like fashion. They remind me of dotted Swiss. They come back every year. They are as sweet as can be, and I've got a lot of them. Here's a clump here. And Stuart, if you don't mind panning over to the clump by the bench. And I've got clumps in the front and the backyard, pretty much all over the place. They're very, very dear. They make a sweet cut flower. And they are, what I like about them is their subtlety. They're very innocent and demure. They're not in your face at all. They don't scream at you, they whisper at you. And I love that about them. And speaking of screaming and whispering, you guys have commented a lot and have told Stuart that he needs to redo the animation, that no more snowfall in the introductory animation. So he's gonna work on that, aren't you, Stuart? Okay, now let's talk hydrangeas. This is a huge stand of hydrangeas, and this is such a frequent problem, you guys, because they have these old dead-looking canes. And you really, this time of year, it is so helpful to know whether or not your hydrangeas bloom on new wood or they bloom on old wood. So pretty much all of these on this side, a little bit further south, all of these bloom on old wood. So I am not going to cut them back in hopes that they will set out buds up the cane, which takes a little bit longer time for them to reach to that point. But I don't want to cut them off prematurely because that's where the flowers are. If I cut the canes off, I'm cutting away the flowers. Now, these may very well have gotten zapped in that Arctic blast that we had, and if they did, then in a few weeks I'll know that, and then I can cut them down. But if you've got hydrangeas in your garden, and if you have a gardener that helps take care of things, I've gotten so many heartsick emails from people because their yard worker or their wife or their husband has cut them back prematurely. So you don't want to do that. But you can see that at the base, there's lots of new growth that's coming up. So the plants are still alive. Hopefully, at least some of them will bloom, but that kind of remains to be seen. Now, those that bloom on new wood, over here, this is an Annabelle, and this one, here's a perfect example. Stuart, can you see the green that's coming out of that tip? That's what you don't want to cut off on those that bloom on old wood. Now this blooms on new wood. Can I get that in the right place, Stuart? This blooms on new wood, so I can cut this back harder if I want to, and it will bloom regardless of my pruning. So it's always good to know what type of hydrangea you have. There aren't, in the nurseries right now, there are fewer and fewer of the old-fashioned varieties. Most of them, because of our wacky weather, they're now selling the ones that bloom on new wood. The Southern Living Plant Collection has some. Endless Summer, you've probably seen. There are a number of different varieties. It will tell you on the care tag whether or not they will re-bloom and how to prune them. So that's one thing there. Stuart, if you can kind of look in the distance, you can see all those sweet little snowflakes bowing their little heads, their sweet little heads in the breeze over there. Above those sweet little heads is a smaller Chinese snowball viburnum, and pretty soon it will put out tiny little lime green blooms, and those are the ones that we're used to seeing in flower arrangements and from the florist. Now, to every bad thing, I guess, there's compensation in the garden. So even though the trees took a hit and there won't be as many beautiful arching branches, nevertheless, now that will get more light, and I anticipate that its bloom will be heavier, and it will also reach a more mature size. It will get a little bit larger. So that is one positive side of the downside of the ice storm. Now come over here if you can, Stuart. And I've got this area is getting ready to be cleaned up. But see all of these sweet little hyacinths, and I've got a number of spent daffodils in here. I'm going to deadhead those. And by the way, once they're past their prime, I just leave them to brown. I don't, do any of this and braid them. I just let them go, they brown, and then they'll come back next year. All of these hyacinths that you see blooming in here started out like this. And you've seen recently how I bought some of these at Trader Joe's, and I enjoy them in the house because they smell wonderful. But once they are spent, then what I do is I just come and plant them out here in this garden. And you can do that with small daffodils, with these little tete-a-tete daffodils, and you can do it with hyacinths, but it doesn't really work with tulips. They just resent coming back. So if you, like me, bought some of these to use inside the house because they were just too dear to resist, then once they're done, you can plant them in the ground, and they come back pretty reliably. And look here, I did the same thing with some muscari or some grape hyacinths that I also bought in a pot, and I just kind of plucked them out here. And you can see that they came back too. And they might naturalize a little bit, they might not, but I feel like I'm getting my money's worth out of them. So let's move back out into the garden now. And it's nobody out here but me, the squirrels, the bees, and actually Stuart's mom is here today too. So if you hear leaf crunching in the background, she's our audience. Hey, Susu. So she's our audience today. Okay, in previous years, Stuart, if you would do a slow pan of the backyard. In previous years, there would be a solid green backdrop of Nandina that now are nothing but brown canes. Typically, Nandina for me are evergreen, but the winter was so hard that even though they're alive, they very much turned brown and dead looking. So this will be a good rejuvenation year. So I'm just cutting some of them back, some of them harder than others. In no time at all, they will flush out and that green backdrop will exist again. But for right now, it's a little bit barren. But in some ways, it's not a distraction, and it gives me a little bit more clarity about what's in the foreground. So that's kind of helpful. All of these guys that you see here, all of this pretty ferny stuff, this is all larkspur that has gone to seed. It does that very easily. It will bloom in this spot, and then once it's finished, I'll let a little bit of it go to seed, and then I'll pull it up. This sweet little blooming thing right here is a nefarious little creature because I planted it, let me think, what is its name? But I planted it thinking it would do just this, and it did, but it does just this. It really has turned into a thug, and it self-seeds everywhere. I saw it at the Dallas Botanical Gardens. It's Mazus reptans, that's the name, Mazus reptans. And I saw it at the Dallas Botanical Gardens, and it was used beautifully, but now I just think it just kind of takes over, and it has a tendency towards spider mite in the summer. So actually now I'm trying to kill it out. I planted it intentionally, and now I'm trying to kill it out. So in my garden, it's one of those things I should not have planted. The oak leaf hydrangeas in the back here, look at this. They're putting out, this is maybe the most reliable blooming shrub you can plant in your garden. It's already starting to put out that foamy green new foliage that is just simply beautiful. And then it will put out those white, really gorgeous pendulous blooms. And this holly that's in here, it needs a little bit of pruning. This standard holly, I pruned it up that way. That was planted by the birds a number of years ago, and I just let it grow, and it gives me nice winter interest with all of these beautiful peeling branches of the oak leaf hydrangeas that surround it. So now let's come back out this way. I had 2 hollies in these pots flanking the office doors, and they were beautiful, and they were beautiful for years, but this year they turned completely brown. I could have waited to see if they would flush back out and put out new growth, but I just decided I didn't want to wait that long, so I think I'm going to put something else in here, and I'm not exactly sure what, but it will probably be something kind of upright and conical. I'll show you that next time. Now be careful backing up, Stuart. So I've taken all of my smaller boxwoods, what I think of as my boxwood theater. They were kind of under leafy clutter, leafy mulch to help protect them through the winter cold. And actually they came through, I think, with pretty much flying colors. I need to prune them and trim on them a little bit. If you want to do the same, I love the look of just boxwood in repetition, in standard form or just in little ball form. And if you want to get that same look, then you can just, let's see, I got this at Lowe's for $9.98, Green Mountain Boxwood, one of my favorite varieties. This is almost in a ball-shaped form already, and you could easily clip this into a topiary form. So I'm still, basically I'm in the process of removing all of the dead so that I can stage it the way I want it and start introducing color. So all this area over here is basically in a state of flux. I'm getting ready to plant a dwarf bonfire peach in this urn here because this year my kind of thematic for 2021 is to have an edible landscape using as many edibles as I can. And this viburnum is starting to bud out behind it. So it will be a pretty green backdrop for these pink flowers, pink and white flowers when they come out. I love, they don't last long, but I really love the flowers that come out in spring on fruit trees, on shrubs, on everything. They're very delicate, they're sweet. Like I said, they're ephemeral. They don't last really long. Either a cold snap or the wind or the heat will get them, but nevertheless, it's that very transient nature that I think makes us love them even more. So I've got to fill all of these pots, and I will do that. Now, a lot of you asked, because you'd seen it in a previous video, last time you saw these were a really deep orange and deep red. And this is a combination of golden barberry and orange rocket barberry. The orange rocket is from the Southern Living Plant Collection. I'm getting ready to cut these back some, but look how sweet and delicate, albeit a little prickly, not real prickly, but how sweet and delicate, and look, it matches my coat exactly. This would be, these little stems would be so sweet in a flower arrangement. I might have to do that this weekend with a thrifted find. But these are just really, really beautiful. They are tough. Some of you have asked, are they invasive in my area? They are not invasive in my area at all. There aren't a lot of things in Oklahoma that are going to be invasive. There's a few, but not a lot of shrubs, simply because it's so arid and dry here. But for us, these make a wonderful, they're obviously deer repellent, they are deer resistant. They are just, they can really handle the heat, and I love the kind of delicate appearance of them this time of year. And back behind them, I have all sorts of white wedding hydrangeas that are getting ready. They're putting out leafy foliage now, and then they will have huge white blooms later on. So again, more pots that I have to figure out what I'm going to do with. I'm starting to trim back now. I think it's pretty safe in zone 7B to start pruning your evergreens. So I'm definitely doing some of that. There's more barberry over here. It amazes me that we had a -13 degree, practically a week of it, And still, insect life survived. And most of the insect life I've seen so far has been the kind I don't want, those little cabbage moths that are fluttering around everywhere. This Woodgelia will come out in gold and bloom in pink. And Stuart, we need to remember to put up some images of what it looks like when they come into full bloom. And then we cut back yesterday all of the backdrop of the Nandinas, and all of the stuff in the foreground is starting to come out. So this is a Cotonester, and it has this really pendulous quality about it. It's great if you're gardening on a slope and you need something to prevent erosion and to kind of cascade down the slope. This would be a wonderful solution to that problem. So this is a Cotonester, and then there's some other things back in there. I've got some big clumps of naked ladies that jut out their foliage in the spring, and then they won't bloom until later in the summer when you've all but forgotten that they're even there. And then pretty soon, the most frequently commented plant in my garden is the Chinese Snowball Viburnum. And this is the absolute most beautiful focal point I can have from my kitchen window. This will just be filled with lime green orbs that will then turn a gorgeous white. And you can see the pollinators love it. And it's really beautiful, and I have limbed it up into a tree form. It started out, I've said this many times, as an $11 shrub from Lowe's. And I pruned it up this way to look like a small tree. And you can do that too. It started out about that size, and I would say this is now about 10 years old. So one trick to get it big this quickly is I have a dedicated, I don't know if you can see it, but there's a dedicated sprinkler head right at the base of it. So I provide it with drip irrigation so it gets reliable watering. And then I also had lots of restoration work done on the fence. We had to take down a section of the fence, put the lattice work back up. So all of those things needed to be done in the time of year when it would not infringe on any of the things that were blooming in the foreground. So Stuart, if you want to look back towards the house, you can see that's my kitchen window there. And you can see that it's just a straight shot to this absolutely gorgeous viburnum. Normally by now, there would already be lots of leaves, even starting to spit out a few pink flowers on this climbing old blush rose. But it had to start all over again after that freeze, and so I've got a little bit of trimming that I need to do on this. But I've got other projects going. Remember, we're going to do our bucket brigade plantings here, so I'm getting ready for that, to shoot that. Here's a tip, you guys. If you want to fill up the bottom of a bucket or a container or whatever, you know, sometimes you've heard about using styrofoam peanuts or things like that. I have found a brilliant solution. Are these corrugated egg containers. I just leave the eggshells in there, put them at the bottom. It breaks down over time. I can put the dirt on top of that. And I did put some drainage holes in those buckets. So I'll talk about that when we work on that project. I'm still waiting to see if this Distillium is going to come out or not. I'm not sure. But I pulled out and pulled up as many things in the backyard or in the front yard as I did in the backyard. So there's lots going on. Stuff is starting to happen, folks. Let me know what's happening in your neck of the woods. Make sure to tell me what zone you garden in. And by all means, feel free to comment on anybody else's comments if they have a question. If they garden in a zone that I don't garden in and you know the answer, we're trying to build a helpful community here, so you guys just respond to one another. I so appreciate you guys answering each other's questions because I am just a pretend gardener. I'm just an amateur. I've been doing it for a long time, but I, like you, just learn as I go, and even though I've been doing it for 30 years, I continue to learn more each year, and a lot of it is from you. So thanks for hanging out with me in my garden, and I'll see you later again this weekend.